early 1990s WWF was a strange, beautiful mess. Hulk Hogan was fading, steroid scandals filled the headlines, and Vince McMahon needed new faces fast, so he built them out of nothing. Vikings, repo men, prison guards, voodoo priests. Gimmicks so bizarre they could only exist in that specific chaotic window of wrestling history. Millions of kids watched these characters every Saturday morning without ever knowing their real names. Then, almost overnight, they vanished. No goodbye matches, no retirement tours, just gone. Some walked into quiet, ordinary lives. Others walked into hospital rooms, courtrooms, or backstage fights that ended careers in a single night. One man's real-life violence became more famous than anything he did in the ring. Another lost a limb decades after the camera stopped rolling. And one gimmick so laughably bad that fans mocked it for years secretly launched one of the biggest characters of the Attitude Era. This is what actually happened to the forgotten men of 90s WWF, the ones history skipped past on its way to the next big star. Start with the Viking. Bald, bearded, wearing furs and horns, screaming in a language that wasn't quite any real language. That was the Berserker, terrifying 7-year-olds in 1991. Behind the face paint was John Nord, a genuinely talented amateur wrestler from Minnesota who'd already spent nearly a decade grinding through AWA and World Class before McMahon repackaged him as a savage barbarian. For a moment it worked. Squash wins, a memorable brawl involving Hulk Hogan. Enough TV time that fans assumed something bigger was coming. It wasn't. By 1993, WWF quietly stopped booking him. Nord drifted onto the independents before stepping away almost entirely, and today lives a private life in the Midwest, avoiding interviews. The man who once screamed like a berserker on national television simply became a regular guy again, which in wrestling is its own kind of disappearing act. Then there was the Repo Man, a ski mask, a tow rope, a gimmick built around stealing wrestlers' personal belongings mid-match. It sounds absurd because it was, but underneath the mask was Barry Darsow, who'd already had a successful run as Smash of Demolition, one of the most dominant tag teams of the late 80s. When Demolition dissolved in 1991, WWF landed on Guy Who Steals Your Stuff as his next act. He debuted in 1992, got a modest push, and vanished from national TV by 1993. Darsow kept working for decades afterward on the independent scene, but the real gut punch came in 2015, when a foot infection he'd quietly been battling turned severe enough that doctors amputated his leg. He's spoken since about the pain and the strange irony of a man who spent his career symbolizing loss finally losing something real. He's still alive today, still connected to the wrestling community. Now the story turns darker. In 1992, WWF introduced a corrections officer gimmick named Nails, real name Kevin Wachholtz, who feuded with Vince McMahon himself over a storyline about workplace abuse. It should have been forgettable mid-card filler. Instead, it became one of the most infamous real-life incidents in wrestling history. According to widely reported accounts from the era, Wachholtz believed he was being underpaid and confronted McMahon backstage, physically assaulting him in his office. He was fired within days, his entire WWF run ending, not with a storyline finish, but with a real assault allegation attached to his name. Wachholtz never had a substantial mainstream career again, working scattered independent shows before leaving the business, occasionally resurfacing in interviews to give his side of a story WWE has never fully addressed on record. It remains one of wrestling's strangest what-ifs. A man remembered less for his in-ring work than for one violent afternoon that ended it. Not every forgotten gimmick stayed forgotten, though. In 1992, WWF debuted Papa Shango, a voodoo priest character complete with smoking skulls and a feud against the Ultimate Warrior built on supernatural curses, unsettling enough that it pushed against the limits of a company still marketing to children. Behind the paint was Charles Wright, a big man with real athletic ability who'd bounced through several territories before landing in WWF. The Shango gimmick ran its course by 1994, and on paper it looked like another failed 90s experiment headed for the scrap heap. But Wright didn't disappear. WWF reinvented him first as Kama, then in 1998 as the Godfather, a pimp character surrounded by dancers, offering opponents hoes instead of handshakes. Crude, dated, and unmistakably of its era, it made Wright one of the most over mid-card stars of the Attitude Era, complete with intercontinental and tag team title runs. The man fans once mocked as a cartoonish voodoo priest ended up building one of the most successful character reinventions in wrestling history. And then there's the story that ties this whole era to something far heavier than nostalgia. Mike Rotunda spent the early 90s as IRS, the taxman gimmick, half of the dominant tag team Money Incorporated alongside Ted DiBiase. It was a smart, well-executed character, and Rotunda quietly built a respectable career before stepping away from performing to work behind the scenes for WWE, helping shape talent for decades. His sons became two of the most recognizable names of the modern era, Bo Dallas and Bray Wyatt. In 2023, Bray Wyatt died suddenly at just 36, a tragedy that shook the wrestling world and turned a forgotten tax collector gimmick from 1991 into the origin point of one of wrestling's most emotional family stories. Behind every forgotten character from that era is a real family, living real lives, carrying real consequences long after the cameras stopped rolling. That's the truth about these lost 90s gimmicks. They were never really jokes. They were real people, thrown into ridiculous costumes, chasing a spotlight that moved on without most of them. And what happened after the lights went out turned out to be far more interesting than anything they ever did under them.